Hey, thanks, Tanya. And thank you, everybody, for showing up for this webinar. This is some work that we've been doing in cooperation with Texas Parks and Wildlife for a number of years, kind of planned right before COVID started, and tried to carry through that and into what we're doing today. So I'll be talking about some of the results over the years of what we're doing with Black-capped Vireo post-delisting monitoring. And as Tanya mentioned, I am the Central Region Director for the American Bird Conservancy, but I worked in Texas for 15 years to stand up the Oaks and Prairies joint venture, which is a partnership of public and private organizations interested in bird conservation. And the geography that we covered was all of the kind of Edwards Plateau, Central Texas, and then everything from San Antonio to Tulsa, Oklahoma, 60 million acre area, which encompasses most of the Black-capped Vireo breeding range. So that's why I was involved. We were working with Clay Green at Texas State University and his student Brendan Mulhall, who did a lot of the field work for us over the years. And then Anna Matthews with the Oaks and Prairies joint venture, and then Texas Parks and Wildlife state ornithologists, starting with Cliff Shackelford and then continuing with Tanya. So collaborative project to help understand Black-capped Vireo populations. Now, I said Black-capped Vireo delisting monitoring because the Black-capped Vireo was actually removed from the endangered and threatened wildlife list in 2008 due to recovery. The Fish and Wildlife Service requires that we monitor the species for at least 5 years post-delisting to ensure that it is the populations don't start going down as soon as we delisted the populations. So a plan was made called the Post-delisting Monitoring Plan, and the monitoring plan outlines a 12-year monitoring period through 2030 now to detect any changes in Black-capped Vireo status of stable and increasing, to ensure that it remains as a viable populations after it was delisted. Texas Parks and Wildlife plays a giant role in the species recovery and continues to manage and monitor for Black-capped Vireo populations on state managed lands as part of the post-delisting monitoring. So the purpose of this project was aimed to gather baseline information on abundance and productivity of Black-capped Vireo populations in protected areas, state parks and state natural areas, to assess population viability and support the continued delisting. And a little bit about the Black-capped Vireo. It's a songbird that breeds in parts of Oklahoma and central and southwestern Texas and into northern Mexico. And I'll show you the full range of the species. Winters in kind of western Mexico. Males have a nice black cap that forms a spectacle around the eye, and immature males have a similar cap that's a little duller gray than mature males. They nest in areas with low-growing shrubby mottes or clumps of trees and bushes with spaces and openings in between within the vegetation. And there's a large variety of plant species that provide ideal habitat for Black-capped Vireo, but it's mostly hill country-like habitat and extends a bit north into Oklahoma into the shrubby areas and the shin oaks. So typical habitat is kind of, it looks similar, but it can be wide ranging, because going from west to east, the amount of rainfall in the Edwards Plateau will affect how much shrubbiness and how quickly those shrubs grow and how much the vegetation grows. So it's kind of those areas that you look around and you see a little clumps of brush around, and that's where Vireos could be. But it could be canopy of junipers, and they're in the spaces in between the taller canopy of trees. especially on the eastern edge of the Edwards Plateau, the hill country of Texas. So the black-capped vireo, like I said, it ranges up into Oklahoma. It used to range up a little bit further north. And then a lot of the population is in Texas, and there's some into northern Mexico for the breeding range. And then the blue part of this map represents the wintering areas, and you can see it's the forests of western Mexico that they're hanging out in the winter 9 months of the year. The post-delisting monitoring plan determined that the two main threats were habitat loss due to various habitat land management choices, and which could include preventing all fires and not using prescribed fire for management, as well as goat grazing and other ways that lands are managed for food and fiber. And then the other major threat is the brown-headed cowbird parasitism. And the brown-headed cowbird is a bird that will lay its eggs in other birds' nests, and that other bird will incur the costs of raising the young. And it's a lot of energy to raise a cowbird that tends to be a lot larger than a black-capped vireo chick, and requires a lot more energy and a lot more food, and also can take the place of one of the black-capped vireo babies in the nest. So in this nest that I'm showing, the white eggs are vireo eggs, and the ones with brown spots that are bigger are the black-capped vireo, or are the brown-headed cowbird. And brown-headed cowbirds are obligate parasites, so they need to nest in other birds' nests. They don't build their own nest, and they can lay up to 40 eggs a year in other birds' nests. So one of the things about the black-capped vireo, the reason it was originally listed in 1986 is it was thought there were about 350 individuals. By 2018, the published estimate for black-capped vireo populations was to delist it was 22,000. Different estimates have put the population at about 220,000 based on breeding bird survey data, which is the common data that we use for a lot of birds to estimate their populations. But the range can be from 20,000 to 350,000. And 220,000 sounds like a lot of birds, but if you look at the table that I have here showing all of the vireo species, you'll see the black-capped vireo is really on the low end. For a songbird, even 22,000 or 220,000 is not very many birds. It's not a really high population, and that estimate comes from there's 4,152 breeding bird survey routes, but only 9 that actually pick up the black-capped vireo. So the less data that we have, the more uncertainty about the population estimate there is, and having a 22,000 estimate and a 220,000 estimate in science isn't all that surprising, given the uncertainty and some of the low amounts of data that we have. One of the places that in Oklahoma where they're still doing a lot of management and monitoring of vireo populations is in the Wichita Mountain Wildlife Refuge in Oklahoma, and they estimate their population at 8,824 birds. And if that's what Oklahoma has, and Texas has about 70% of the population, the total global breeding population, the estimates closer to 220,000 make more sense. But like I said, this is difficult to estimate a true population when they're this small relative to what some of the other vireos are. So for this project, after talking about abundance, the objectives were to determine the abundance of black-capped vireos and to look at the productivity and especially the brown-headed cowbird parasitism rate in various properties with known Vireo populations to make sure that they're still there, they're still doing well, and that nothing's happening that would cause us to try to rethink the delisting of the Black-capped Vireo. So there were about 35 sites that are listed with population estimates within the Black-capped Vireo range, and these are the little red dots and purple dots across this kind of, here's Austin area and San Antonio, and you can see going west, that's where the locations were for Black-capped Vireos. And up in this table, you can see the estimated populations in each of those properties at one time in history, how many Black-capped Vireos were thought to be there. And so those form the baseline information with which we are comparing our monitoring as we go through. So Texas Parks and Wildlife manages a lot of those areas, and our goal was to try to get to as many of those as possible. And the ones in red are the areas where this project has done some work, and the ones in yellow are areas that already had or have other groups monitoring those populations. Some with Texas Parks and Wildlife management areas have been doing a lot of work in Kerr and in Mason Mountain Wildlife Management Area. Devil's River was an area that we were intending to go to, but COVID kind of nixed those plans. And one of the reasons is it's so far out west, it's really hard to get housing. And at the time of COVID, there weren't a lot of hotels available. So we haven't been able to get back on track to get to that area, but we're hoping to soon. And so there are tier 1 areas that had more than 30 Vireos and tier 2 areas that had less than 30 Vireos. And that's where we tried to focus most of our monitoring in tier 1, but didn't want to miss a opportunity to get into tier 2 areas just to make sure that the populations weren't declining in those areas. So this is what we set up for abundance monitoring, is putting out a grid of points and then sampled a subset of that grid of points, and getting to each one of these, they're pretty far away from roads. So this was pretty intense work just to get out and do a 3-minute count in the morning to get the highest activity level of the Black-capped Vireos so we could detect them. And this is just the Devil's Sinkhole State Park showing where we detected Black-capped Vireos in 2022 and points where we didn't. So the data that we collected over since 2020 across these sites, you could see that like Kickapoo Cavern State Park, we were able to visit 2 years in a row. That was part of the protocol, and got about the same number of birds, although 2022 was a drought year. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then in 2023, we had a much bigger crew, so we were able to visit a lot more sites and get points done in a lot of areas. And you could see the number of point counts that we were able to do. And like I said, this is a lot of walking, so we're lucky to get 1 or 2, sometimes 3 points done in the morning, because they were randomly placed across the property to kind of sample the property. This year in 2024, we got out to Colorado Bend and Inks Lake for a second time, because we had a much smaller crew again, and we're able to basically replicate the same number. So gives us confidence that the populations there are at least staying the same over 2 years, and our intent is to visit them again. So the results from kind of the abundance is we detected a good number of birds where we expected, based on the previous research, is the previous monitoring that was done historically at these sites. Where there were a lot of birds, we found a lot of birds. Where there weren't that many birds, we found that there weren't that many birds, but there were always at least some black-capped vireos in every one of the properties that we went to. So there's a nice correlation between what we detected and what we were expected, which is a good sign that the birds are doing well. One of the other things we tried to do is that's pretty standard is do some distance sampling where a person would be standing right here to do a point count in a designated location, and we would hear birds within a certain radius of where they are detectable, and with a lot of songbirds that's out to maybe 50 meters, less than 50 meters, and then use that to calculate an expected density so that we can project out from that density, how many birds are in this circle is a sample. And if we do a bunch of samples in a property, we can take the ratio of how many birds were in this area and calculate how many birds we would expect as a population across the whole property. And so when we did that, here is the different locations, number of points surveyed, and the detections, which were highly correlated with the historical data, were there. But when we did full population estimates, you could see that some of these projected out to 1,000 or over 1,000 bird black-capped vireos, which is a lot higher than any of the historic counts of these populations, and we're kind of dealing with that same kind of population estimate issue that we had with what presented for the global population is when you start projecting out with a little bit of data, the uncertainty is really high. So the good thing is that the expected populations and our detections are matching the right patterns. The kind of thing that makes our heads makes us scratch our heads a little bit right now is our full population estimates are a lot bigger than what is published in the post-delisting monitoring protocol. But that's part of science. That's what we're going to be looking into, do more analysis. And so this is just showing the historic population estimates, our population estimates, and then our detections. They're correlated, but the population estimates are a lot higher, and the detections match more closely with the historic populations than anything. All that to say, it's a good story that where we expected birds, they were there, and where we expected a lot of birds, there were a lot of birds. So that leads us to the other part where we did some nest searching and during 2021 to 2024, and the idea with the nest searching is to just knowing that the bird's there is not enough information. We also need to know how they're doing with these populations. So we went out and tried to look for nests. It's a lot of work. It's hard work to find nests, especially in a place where everything is thorny and there's snakes and spiders and it's hot. So we had technicians out there for 2 months out of the year to try to look at nesting success, and using various methods for nest searching. And this is where I specialize and try to tell people that there are at least 8 or 9 ways to nest search, and most of the technicians, they start out just kind of walking around and looking for the nests and following the parents to follow them with food and nesting material and mate guarding and other display behaviors until you see a couple of nests. And once you see a couple of nests, then you can start looking in the right places, which is the way that really pays off for nest searching. There are other ways to find nests, like we found nests where the young birds are begging for food, and that can cue you in on where to look. Sometimes the birds, the babies will, instead of pooping in the nest, they'll have kind of a gelatinous covering around their poop, and those fecal sacs could drop over the edge of the nest, and you can see them on the ground. And then if you see them on the ground and look up, the nest is right above you. Hard part about nest searching is being patient, that you got to find a nest. It's your job to find a nest of a species and to find multiple nests of the same species. So sitting and listening is an important part of the job, which is really hard to know that you're getting paid, but you got to sit and listen to birds. And then sometimes you just kind of start walking around, not paying any attention. Your mind starts to wander. It's hot out, and then boom, there's a nest right there. So I call that using the force, or if you like the A-team, being on the jazz and finding a nest. And usually the nests that we're looking for are little cup nests that are hanging down they're attached at the top of the nest, and they kind of hang down like a hammock with eggs inside. And if you look really closely at the edge of this motte, you'll see the nest sitting there in that spot. And some of them will be well covered, and some of them will be out in the open. They're usually about chest high. And then once we find the nest, we go out and we monitor the nest and try to determine whether it's been parasitized. And so nest monitoring was done at a subset of sites over the years. And these are the results of the nest monitoring so far. We were able to monitor nests at 2 sites in 2023, but each year we were picking just one site in 2021, 2022, and 2024, and trying to do them two years in a row. And you could see the number of nests we were able to find. 2022 was a drought year, so it really affected not only the number of nests but the success. You could see the nesting success was really low in 2022. 2024 was a challenging year for us this year as well to find nests at Colorado Bend, because there was a lot of rain. There was a lot of other things happening. We found a lot of white-eyed vireo nests as well as black-capped vireo nests. The key number here is the amount of parasitism, the amount of nests that had cowbird eggs in them, which range between about 20% and 50%, but these are still small numbers. Our intent is to kind of put all this information together and be able to understand a little bit more about cowbird parasitism. So one of the things that came out of this project is we had a graduate student, Brendan Mulhall, who was able to do his master's thesis off of this work and look at the habitat characteristics around the nest and the influence of nest site characteristics on the success and parasitism of black-capped vireo. So I stole a couple of slides from his thesis presentation. He's now up in New Hampshire working for the NRCS to deliver conservation, but he was out in Texas for a couple of years running our project, and even did a field season with a broken foot there. So one of the things he looked at was the influence of varied characteristics, scale characteristics on black-capped vireo nest success in the Edwards Plateau. And so using some of the nesting data and doing some modeling, he was able to find that we expected vegetation to be used in the literature. They talk about using kind of oak deciduous trees with leaves that kind of fall off versus juniper trees or coniferous trees. And in 2021, which was a non-drought year, most of the trees used for nesting were non-coniferous trees. In 2022, it was almost half and half because most of the trees didn't have leaves in that drought year. So we were able to kind of document what choices were being made for nesting sites in a drought year. And also we were able to monitor some of the the changes in the predator species, including katydids, which have been published and known to affect some of the nesting birds, as well as snakes and ants and other things you might not think about. And so we found higher reproductive success in non-coniferous substrate in the year in the non-juniper trees. We find higher reproductive success. Nests found in 2022 were less successful than those found in 2021, because 2021 was not a dry year. This is from Drought Monitor modeling, and you can see it's white over here, whereas in 2022 it's dark red, the worst level drought. And living in Texas even a little bit, you'll understand drought conditions. So kind of the management implications on this is we got to manage habitat that will provide homes during the worst drought years, as well as the average conditions. So this is kind of indication of some of the management that they're doing, removing ash, juniper, and this doesn't look great the first year, but after a couple of years of growing back, this turns into great habitat for a lot of species, including the black. Second chapter, it was looking at the influence of varied scaled characteristics on brown-headed cowbird parasitism, and we did the same nest searching, and 50% of the nests were found in non-coniferous substrates, and 50% were found in coniferous substrates. But parasitism was found mostly in the non-coniferous substrate, where the majority of the parasitized nests were placed below 1 meter in height. And so all of that has to say, some of the things we need to think about is when and where we manage within seasons, where we manage properties will affect populations, and we could start to tease apart some of those pieces. So brown-headed cowbird, like I talked about, the babies are really big of brown-headed cowbird compared to the black-capped vireo. So this will continue to be a threat for the population, but habitat can help manage that, and some places have continued doing some brown-headed cowbird trapping to reduce some of this parasitism rate. This is a bird sitting on the edge of the nest waiting for food, and you can see does not fit in that tiny nest for the vireo. So just talking a little bit about what had been planned and what we're planning to do in the future. Talked about this is a 12-year post-delisting monitoring plan with a COVID year in there that kind of shut us down. So we've been able to get to a few sites, and like I said, our plan to get to Devil's River, which is a giant tier 1 area, hasn't happened yet, but we're hoping to in 2025. And we're on our second half, kind of the downhill side of this post-delisting monitoring plan. First visits were in the first 6 years, second visits were in the second 6 years. And with comparing to the historical population, that'll give us 3 points to kind of make a line and make sure that that line is not a decreasing population. And so we're taking steps and making plans to continue this monitoring, post-delisting monitoring. We plan to continue monitoring through year 12. The other part that hoping to do soon is an analysis of minimum nesting success and maximum parasitism rate that these populations can tolerate on each property. There's a whole bunch of research that's been published out there, but making that research into a decision support tool for management to decide, is this a good place for black-capped vireos if they're there, and do we know that they're producing young and being successful in that endeavor for them to survive. And then we're also we'll be making more habitat models to inform management and to prioritize maybe where certain treatments like prescribed fire or brush clearing might help to enhance the population. And like I said, there was a lot of partners that were involved in helping to make this project come together. Just within Texas Parks and Wildlife, we had the different programs within the state parks, the diversity program, the small game program, and the big game program all support at least a piece of this project. The big game program provided trailers that we were able to put on state park land that the small game program managed, so that we could have our technicians on the properties. Also, of course, the American Bird Conservancy, the Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture, Texas State University, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and lots of field technicians over the years, between 2 and 4 every year out there, marching around trying to find nests and trying to be patient enough and endure the 2 months of being in these hot Texas conditions looking for nests. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Yep, we're starting to get some questions rolling in. So our first question is, are old nests used again the following year?
Most songbirds do not reuse nests. They may take pieces of the nest to build in other places, but usually most songbirds, except for flycatchers, Phoebes will reuse their nests. And one of the things about reusing a nest, especially with Phoebes, is when they do, the parasites that they had on their bodies in the first nesting period will populations will increase by the next nesting period. So that's one of the reasons why you don't want to reuse a nest is there may be body parasites within the nest that are feeding on the blood of the young that will decrease their survival.
Thanks. Okay, our next question is, how do katydids affect nests?
Insects can get into and break open eggs and destroy nests that way. Not just the fire ants, but the katydids were getting into nests, and it's documented in the literature. It's really weird, not expected, interesting stuff.
Okay, our next question is, what kind of listening devices are used in your original population surveys before nest searching for the 50-meter circle?
So there are what they call autonomous recording units that you can put out to record birds, but it's really hard to get distances from that. So right now we're just hiring technicians and training them to listen for the bird, but the harder part is figuring out where the bird is and how far that is away from you in different habitat types. So it's still kind of the same tried and true method of having people go out and do point counts rather than trying to use any of the technology so far.
Okay, our next question is, do you use iNaturalist data, specifically from the Texas Nature Trackers project, Birds of Texas?
In general, for conservation, yes, iNaturalist, eBird, Breeding Bird Survey, Christmas bird counts, those are all citizen science projects that feed into my daily work as doing conservation at the the state scale, the ecoregion scale, and the continental scale. So yes, for this project, these are known populations within state properties. So it was just a matter of going in and setting up the random grid and then trying to find the birds, because some of them haven't been monitored heavily, or the iNaturalist and eBird data doesn't give great locations. So it was more word of mouth and trying things out to find them within the properties.
Okay, great. Is there a report available that summarizes the data and analysis of this presentation? And if not, will one be made and shared?
Yes, there are multiple annual reports that are around. I don't know where Texas Parks and Wildlife keeps those. Tanya would know that. And we do annual reports, and we did do a final report based on the first 3-year contract of the monitoring so far, and that was through last year. So that would not. I'm working on writing the report for 2024 right now, but through 2023 that's done. Brendan's thesis is also available through Texas State, which has 2021 and 2022 information. And then we also have a publication in press, Southwestern Naturalist, that's going to be available soon.
Great, thank you. And from the Texas Parks and Wildlife end on that is something I don't necessarily have the latest update on, because some of this depends on updates to our website. And so that's something that I would have to defer to. I don't know if, Jonah, if you're able to unmute and answer that question at all, but we definitely do have reports, but we have a bit of a situation in flux with our website.
Yeah, and the other challenge with a lot of our reports is that we have to go through and make sure to redact any potential confidential information from landowners who agree to a confidentiality, agreement with Parks and Wildlife. So they certainly can be made available, and we want to make them available, but there's a few hurdles to jump through to make that happen.
Awesome, thanks, Jonah. Next question, do you or others remove cowbirds from nests?
Cowbirds are a native species, so they're technically protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, as far as I understand it. I have never removed cowbird eggs from a nest because I'm always monitoring the success of the nest without affecting it as much as possible. So you do need a permit to remove remove eggs, as far as I know, because they are a protected species. So I do not encourage it, but it happens.
Okay, our next question, are jays also found in Black-capped Vireo nesting areas?
Yes, in some of the areas you get different kind of jay species as the avian predators are one of the kind of things that we worry about, and especially when you're checking nests, you gotta look like you're looking in many different places so that you don't lead any of the avian predators that may be watching you to the nest. So that's pretty standard protocol to worry about that. But if that's why you're asking about jays.
A bit of a follow-up to the brown-headed cowbird question. Many of your properties were state properties. What were the barriers to them conducting brown-headed cowbird trapping?
I don't work for the state, so I couldn't tell you what the barriers are. I know that it's pretty labor intensive, and it can be expensive and hard to raised enough money to be able to run it. Besides the permitting and the identifying the right species and dispatching birds, especially native species, it all requires permits and working things out. So I don't want to speak for Texas Parks and Wildlife, but I can say that just the process of maintaining that is an expense.
Okay, thank you. If you manage land for black-capped vireo by removing ash juniper, how does this affect golden cheek warblers that rely on juniper?
Right. Yeah. So golden cheek warblers are kind of you can find black-capped vireos and golden cheek warblers in pretty much the same areas. Sometimes they'll overlap their territories. The habitat is it's kind of the shrubby habitat and then the canopy trees. And with everything in wildlife management, you're going to be helping some species and negatively affecting other species. They'll have to find other places to go. If you think kind of longer term, the management for black-capped vireo habitat would require setting back the tree growth to kind of bare dirt that will grow up into a shrubland that will grow up into a forest. And if you think longer term and have lots of different areas to do that, you can have space for both black-capped vireo and golden cheek warblers and maintain it, with various management practices. But year to year, if you're making black-capped vireo habitat, you're taking away golden cheek warbler habitat in that same spot. And it's just kind of part of wildlife management and a choice that you have to make.
Okay, thank you. When trying to determine a trend for this vireo, with all the obstacles you mentioned with monitoring in that rugged terrain, is the 12-year period that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came up with an adequate amount of time?
For the process, probably yes. For the species itself, it's gonna stay on the list of priority birds. It'll stay within the state wildlife action plans. It just won't be listed as an endangered species, and it'll be supported based on the population that we were monitoring and the other populations that are being monitored by Fish and Wildlife Service, the Department of Defense. All of them are doing the same pieces of this 12-year post-delisting monitoring and contributing to the bigger story of, are the vireo populations maintaining themselves after being listed. But for the American Bird Conservancy, the black-capped vireo will stay on our priority lists. For partners in flight, it'll be on that national priority list. And it's not like we're going to stop thinking about black-capped vireos and trying to increase their populations. They'll be a priority species. They just won't be an endangered species or a threatened species.
Okay, another brown-headed cowbird question, and I know you addressed the obligate brood parasite piece, but do brown-headed cowbirds ever nest and raise their own young?
As far as I know, they're obligate parasites, so they don't build a nest. They're kind of the evolution of that is to follow buffalo herds and be able to move quickly. And so their whole nesting strategy is to put their young, their eggs in other birds' nests and move on. And then there are a whole bunch of behavioral mechanisms for a cowbird baby to realize that it's a cowbird and then group up with cowbirds to make more cowbirds later. And they are, like I said, native species. There is supposed to be based on the ecology and the way the brown-headed cowbird lives, a regular population of cowbirds. It's just how they've moved into other areas based on the way that humans use the land is kind of the impact that we're dealing with.
So kind of related to that, do vireos have, or maybe developing or evolving, defensive mechanisms against cowbirds?
Vireos specifically, somewhat. They can, try to keep the cowbirds from laying in their nest, but they're a small bird, and cowbirds, that's how they survive. So they're able to get past that. Other birds will abandon nests. Vireos might abandon a nest if they only laid one egg, or didn't lay any eggs yet, and the cowbird got in there. But usually, once they've invested in laying some eggs in the nest, they'll try to incubate those and have some vireo babies and some cowbird babies. And if it's a good year and there's enough food, that they can pull off, successfully fledging a cowbird young and vireo young from a nest. Other birds will, like the yellow warbler, will be able to build a new nest on top of the old nest, and they have examples where they've done it 8 times in a row, where a cowbird put an egg in the nest, and then they built another nest on top of it, and didn't incubate those eggs, and eventually hatched out the one on top. So one of the reasons why we worry about brown-headed cowbirds with vireos is there isn't a lot of good strategies for a vireo to kind of prevent a cowbird from laying eggs in their nest.
Do or can volunteers help with the crews to survey for black-capped vireos at the specific sites? And if so, how can you sign up to volunteer?
So specifically on this monitoring, it's pretty intensive. It takes a long time to, a couple of weeks to get a technician trained, and they kind of got to be out there every day, especially for nest searching. Asking a volunteer to do work every day is really hard to do, which is why we hire people and pay them for their time, and give them the experience of kind of doing field research. There are lots and lots of other monitoring that it would be more of a 1 or 2 day investment, or once a week investment, that I would recommend over nest searching. I like to do nest searching because, it's, to me, it's Easter every day. I get to go out and look for nests, but I don't get to do it nearly as much. And if you're not out there every day, you can't learn the behavior of the individual birds and kind of figure out where they are in the nesting cycle, so you can increase your chances of finding their nest. And like I said, finding nests and having it be your job for 2 months to find one nest a day is really nerve-wracking. Takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of time, and volunteers haven't worked out because it's a lot of time investment, but I wouldn't say you couldn't volunteer to do it.
Okay, great. Does TPWD trap cowbirds still?
That I don't know. I'd have to ask the state ornithologist.
I knew that was coming. We have in the past definitely done that on some of our properties. I'm actually trying to go through my emails right now to see if that's something that has been done actively in the last year or so. So that might be an answer for later. So we'll move us on to another question while I try and see if I can find that information. Is data from other agencies or NGOs used for this project?
Yes, for the larger project, which is the post-delisting monitoring project, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and you know, with the help of our crews hired through the American Bird Conservancy, are contributing to the larger post-delisting monitoring that you know, Fort Casabos is contributing information, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is actually compiling all that information. So there are lots of different partners working on that, and for this specific part, this was just to get to some of the properties that Texas Parks and Wildlife manages, and it's hard to get people out there. It's hard to get them to have a place to live. We had to deal with immigration policing issues getting to some of these sites because they are closer to the border. That created a bunch of challenges as well. So it's not easy work to do. It's very specialized kind of work, and I'm happy to be helpful where I can be with getting, you know, kind of the nesting part of it, which is, you know, not every even professional ornithologist deals with finding nests of tiny songbirds with tiny nests out in the middle of brushy areas. So yes, lots of partners working together on the larger project, but specifically for Texas Parks and Wildlife, it's kind of, we have to pay people to do this. This is hard work.
Okay, another question, this one relating to the study design. Did you use stratified random sampling to set points, or were all habitats used?
All habitats were used because the properties were small enough that we set out a grid and randomly picked points across all of the habitat to try to not only sample every area and create a sample of the property, but also to make sure that we weren't missing anything just because of we tried to deal with access issues. Like there are some steep ravines in some of these properties, and there's not a lot of roads. So we did our best to get to all of the randomly selected points, and it represents about 10% of the points on most of these properties because they are so small.
Okay, another sampling question. In your surveys, were you only recording Black-capped Vireo that were within 50 meters of your points, or were you recording all Black-capped Vireo heard under the assumption that they must be within 50 meters of the points? Asking because in this person's experience, you can hear Black-capped Vireo from at least 200 meters away.
Right. No, the 50 meters was just kind of an example that I was showing. We recorded anything we heard as far as Black-capped Vireos, and then recorded the distance, and the sampling method takes into account that you're more likely to hear a singing bird that's closer to you than farther away from you, and that's part of the statistical analysis. But as far as what we collected on the data, we were happy to record any Black-capped Vireo that we heard at any distance from the points. And then even in between traveling to and from the points, we recorded some of that data because they may not be picked up at the actual count time, but it's information to know to find places to go back and look for nests.
Okay, we're getting pretty close to time, so I'm going to kind of cruise through some of the questions. We have some that are kind of duplicates of others here. On the Travis County BCP, there was a doubling in territories and abundance this year. Was there any indication of population increase in the eastern edge of the Edwards Plateau?
That I can't answer. We were only at 2 sites, Colorado Bend and Inks Lake this year. And all I have is compared to last year, we detected pretty much the same birds. same amount of birds.
And do you think there are any negative impacts from observers monitoring nests throughout the season? And what can you do to limit impacts like attracting predators?
Yep. So there is research showing that you can have impacts on nesting birds by checking nests, but there are ways to mitigate that, like taking into account that you may be watched by avian predators, and to check uh, um, check multiple sites, make it look like you're checking a nest so that they can't cue in on you just peeking into a nest. That behavior means there's some food there. Other things that we do is try not to leave trails, try to check nests from a distance. Once you found the nest, don't spend a lot of time at a nest. The overriding kind of ethos of nest searching is to not have as little effect on the nest success as possible by monitoring the nests, and we do everything that we can think of to try to minimize that.
Okay, and then I think we have time for one last question here. Is the cowbird range overlap with black-capped vireos part of their expansion post-buffalo herd? And is a success in cowbird parasitism then because black-capped vireos did not evolve with cowbirds?
Those are two very good questions. One, the first one, probably they're in the overlap of the historic range. I have to look that up. What happens is if forest areas get a little more fragmented than they used to be historically, broken up into smaller pieces, cowbirds are basically a grassland bird, but they can get into the forests and parasitize forest bird nests, which they're not as equipped as some of the grassland birds to deal with cowbird parasitism on an evolutionary scale. So there's kind of that piece that some of the habitats are more fragmented in the forest areas that are causing cowbirds to access areas. They can travel over 7 miles easily over forest to get into the areas where they're going to look for nests. So they're pretty much built to move around a lot, and it'd be pretty hard to find an area that they can't get into. But how much energy do they want to spend? They'll go to the easier areas than the harder areas.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jim, and for everyone who attended our presentation